Hello again, whiskey friends. Thanks for joining today, everybody. And are you curious about what it's like to go on a barrel pick? Because that is one of the questions that I got for today's Tuesday discussions. Here on Tuesdays, we do like to answer questions that either come from Patreon, the YouTube comments, or Instagram comments. And today's question was, hey, what is it like to go on a barrel pick? And what are the type of things that you expect when you go on them? So I'm going to go through 5 things that are insights or reflections about the barrel picks that I have been on, and I'll sprinkle in a few stories as we go. So thank you for joining me today, whiskey friends. Let's kick off the show. All right. And for today's Tuesday discussion, I always like to have a drink that somewhat fits the theme. So today, I am going to have a whiskey war. This is a double oaked, essentially a blend of, bourbon and rye. Comes out of Columbus, Ohio. And they're getting their stuff from MGP. Oh, that sprinkle totally fell in my drink. So I got a sprinkle flavor whiskey war. So cheers to David. Happy birthday. This was David's happy birthday bottle and a pick that I was invited to go on, thus it fitting today's theme. So I'll put the wax right back on there. There we go. Got all the nice wax and sprinkles. And now my entire bar here is covered in sprinkles. So let's go through 5 things, what I expect when I go on barrel picks. A, man, they are a ton of fun. I have had good times doing barrel picks, regardless of if it's the online format or if it's the in person format. Of course, the in person format is a whole lot better, but we know how to have fun online as well. Now, I say all that, but I've only gone into this as the helper. Like, I'm never footing the bill for that barrel that's being picked. There's no pressure on me. I'm there for the fun of it and just appreciating the fact that I was invited to go on these picks. So I can go into it, with light shoulders. Whereas I can see other people that are going into the situation, there might be some pressure. I mean, if you're supporting a group, you have pressure to find a barrel that's worthy of your group, something that you're going to be proud of, something you think people are going to enjoy. And you might go into the experience and there might be no samples that you like. Well, what do? Do you pick the best of the samples that they gave you? Do you push back until you're satisfied? What if they won't give you any more samples? And if you say, you know what, I'm not going to buy anything, I'm walking away, did you maybe break that relationship with that distillery, kind of wasting their time? I don't know. It depends how aggressive you want to be. But once again, that's not even counting the 10, 15, $20,000 that you might be laying down for a barrel of bourbon. And then on top of that, the pressure to hopefully sell out all of it so that you can go and pick another. Because if you are picking barrels and you're in that type of situation and you're not selling out, well, you're not going to be picking many more. There's must be a reason that they're not selling out. Maybe you're not picking things that are good. Maybe your group isn't big enough to support the pick. Whatever it is. So there's some pressure. But for me, hey, I just get to smile and have some fun when I go on these things. Now, the next one I'm going to go through is you got to feel out the group a little bit when you go on these barrel picks. So I have been on these picks in, I would say, essentially 3 different situations. A, a room of complete strangers that I've never talked to or never seen face to face before. So not only is there that added burden of like getting to know the people, but also like, how do I communicate with them? What are they into? What do they like? What are they looking for? How am I going to open that type of dialogue with them? So you got to feel out the room, especially if it's a room full of strangers. I've also gone with groups of people that I know everybody, and then groups of people that I know half and half. And you got to navigate all those situations a little differently. I mean, ultimately, you got to figure out a way to fit into the group because if you don't fit into the group, why would they invite you back for another one? You kind of get the theme there. You want to be invited back either by the distillery or the group to do more of the picks. You don't want to be one and done. But there are also politics to kind of feel out when you get in the room. Who's being the most verbal, the most aggressive? Who was the one spouting out all the tasting notes? Okay, sometimes it's me. You know how I roll. Who is the one that just seems to be making up stuff on the fly? I mean, it happens all around the room, and then somebody starts politicking for the one that they like rather than asking everybody's opinions. You got to kind of feel it out. Now, that is a situation where I can't wait to go on a barrel pick with Kelsey and Darrell. I've been on picks with Darrell, but I've not been on any with Kelsey, and never have the three of us done it at the same time. But what I do look forward to when we do get into that situation is the fact that we do know how to communicate. We have somewhat of a common ground of what we're looking for, and that's room to build on. Now, we all have our nuances. You can tell that in the scores. We all score things a little differently. We have different opinions about things, but we know how to communicate to come together, and we know how to interpret what each other is saying and how into it they are. When I say something's interesting or funky and I have a smile on my face, Kelsey's immediately going to go, no, no, we cannot get the funky off profile one. But that's a big thing about it, feeling out the group and trying to figure out how to have that level of communication. And, that's something that you're just going to have to figure out with your own personality on how you're willing to throw your name into the hat on that. I actually tend to just kind of sit back, watch the room, make my own opinions. And then if I see it gravitating towards something that I have a drastic, qualm against, then I'm going to say something, but I'll feel out the room first before I get too aggressive about my tasting notes or my opinions. I'll just smile, talk about other things, work the room a little bit versus being focused, hyper focused on the whiskey. Now, then it comes to the next thing I'll talk about. And I would recommend before you go into a barrel pick to actually think about what are the type of things that you look for. What are you going to look for in this whiskey? An easy thing is to say, I'm going to look for something that tastes good. All right. Well, taste is more subjective than anything we have. But are you somebody who just likes something that is smooth, not a deep thinker, doesn't have the complexity, doesn't have the proof punch, maybe? You're going to be looking for something different than certainly for me. Now, we do all these reviews. You hear us talk through our process all the time. I would say the one thing that I concentrate on when I'm doing a barrel pick is more of those experience metrics. And then I go back to the flavor metrics. Because once again, flavor is subjective, and I can kind of find beauty in a whole bunch of array of flavors unless something is truly off putting about it. But when it comes to that experience score that we always talk about, does it have depth in the flavors? Does it have immediate flavors up front, then in the mid, and then in the finish? Is the finish nice and long? How is that mouth feel? Those are the type of things that I'm actually going to put stock on when I'm doing a barrel pick experience. Now, I'm going to be writing down my flavor notes as I go along, and hopefully nothing's off putting. But ultimately, when something does do well on all the experience metrics, you can then fill in the flavors. It's very rare to say something has depth and complex flavors, but all the flavors that it's giving me are awful, right? That doesn't really happen. So usually the flavors come. So I look for that full experience, which is one of the reasons why I enjoy Jason and Scott and the Mash and Journey Club so much, because man, when you get one of their bottles, there's going to be a finish, and that could be a hard thing to find. And I have seen groups that actually purposely pick things that don't have finishes because they find that to be harsh. They just want the sweetness up front, and then when you drink it, it's like it's nothing. And that's what they're looking for. That's not what I am going to be looking for. I will be looking for a complete experience. Now, the distilleries here, they're all different. All the distillery experiences vary in some way. If you're doing it online, of course, that's a lot different. They're sending you the sample bottles, and you're doing those bottles in some type of Zoom call, or how we do them here on StreamYard. But if you go to the distillery, they actually do a good job of showing you a good time, showing you what they have to offer, giving you a little bit of a tour. The hard truth experience that we had at the beginning of the summer was pretty amazing when we jump on ATVs and we're going throughout the woods and everything else. We did that before we started drinking, don't you worry. But even then, when we got into the barrel house and, we get to nerd out with everybody that's making the whiskey, and they figure out that you maybe somewhat know what you're talking about. So then they get excited. And then they start giving you samples of other things. And then you start exploring the rick house, and you never know what trouble you're going to get into. Other ones, though, whew, I've been on a few experiences where I'm like, man, I don't know what they're doing or why they put this together. Sometimes you get the 4 samples and it feels curated, and you kind of understand why they gave you the samples that they were looking for. And you can tell at least they drank them before they gave them to you. And maybe they're excited about the prospects of all the samples that they gave you. Maybe they're leaning one way or another, but at least they gave you a variety to see which way you lean, and they curated it for you. I've been on other experiences where I'm like, man, I think they rolled out straight 4 random barrels. And I'm pretty sure 2 of the ones that we just taste aren't even single barrel worthy. So I don't even know why it's in our lineup, unless they're just trying to pull something and push us towards the other 2 and make those look better by comparison. But you really, really never know what you're getting into in that situation, if they are curating it or if it is just some random whiskey, and you can get some funky things. And then you just question, why did you pick these? Why are these in the experience? So just keep that in mind. Distillery to distillery, you are going to get something different, which is actually exciting, though, because then at least every time you go to a different distillery, you have a new adventure, even if you've done barrel picks before. And for the last thing that I'm going to comment on here, and this might come to a surprise if you've not done a barrel pick before, but they can change drastically from the time that you do the barrel pick to the time that it's actually bottled. So think about this for a second. I haven't taken a sip of this yet. See? I'll talk about this one here too. But think about this for a second. You go on a barrel pick in May, and they don't actually barrel it or put it in bottles until September, October, November. A whole half a year goes by. That is time that thing was in the wood. And ultimately, the flavor profile might be a little different. I mean, that's why we do this, right? Like, there's so much variation in these single barrels because of their time in the barrels and all these characteristics and where they were aged and the weather, yada, yada, yada. So if you're talking about something that was, let's just say, 3 years old, like that Hard Truth, and it stays in a barrel for an extra 4 to 6 months, that's a pretty significant portion of its time. So Durrell had a little sample of the Hard Truth pick that we did with Mash and Journey, and he had it from the glass that we had so that he could compare it when it came out. And he was like, "Oh my gosh, it is different. It's so much darker. The one now that's bottled is so much darker. I like them both, but it became something different because of that extra time." And you never know. Maybe that extra time does something good. Maybe it doesn't. Sometimes they'll do finishings to the single barrel you pick. Maybe that turns out well, maybe it doesn't. So what you picked may not ultimately be what ends up in the bottle, but you just kind of get used to that, the adventure as well. Now, I will say on this particular one, this whiskey war, the one thing that stuck out to me that I didn't save my notes, and then later on they started asking me for notes. I kept saying, man, I'm pretty sure I remember there being a very distinct apricot on the finish. You can put that in the notes. That'll be my contribution. And then when I poured this thing and I took a sip of it, I was like, oh, thank God, that apricot note is there. So, you just don't know until you get there. But so there's that sense of relief that everyone has that picked a barrel, that when it's in a bottle, let me taste it again. And hopefully I didn't make a wrong decision. Man, that's months worth of anxiety there. Going back to point number 1, I just get to be in it for the fun of it. But hey, maybe we'll do something in the future here. That'll probably be a goal for 2024, to have another Hello Again Whiskey Friends barrel pick. But we shall see where it goes. So let me know what you think of this video and the content. Do you have any follow-up questions on this particular subject? Do you agree with all the points, or do you have a different experience or a different point that you'd like to bring up? I know many of you that are watching this have done barrel picks before. I want to know what you think. Add to the conversation and let us know in the comments. So thank you for joining me today, Whiskey Friends. I'll catch you on the next Tuesday discussion. Goodbye, everybody.
Jeff, just be friends with me. But you have these whiskey friends. and you say hello again. Oh, Jeffrey, you should just be friends with me. But you have these whiskey friends, and you say hello again. Oh, Jeffrey, you should just be friends with me. But you have these whiskey friends, and you